Morning, everybody. We want to continue with our lecture. Last time we looked at risk management. Today we are looking at responses and mitigation to risk, which is referred to as risk control. Responses and mitigation to risk. My name is Mr. Ibe Benjamin. I'm the CEO of Danny King Consulting. Danny King Consulting is a chartered accountant and a management consulting firm. We provide a series of services ranging from preparation of financial statements and also tax consultancy services, financial advisory services, strategic management advisory services, human resource management, which include recruitment selection and placement. We also provide other services that include feasibility report writing, marketing research studies, and other range of services. We can be gotten on this number 080-281-77177. 080-281-77177. 081-80-555-011. 08081. I repeat, 080-555-011. Our website is www.dannykingconsulting.com. So in continuation of our lecture series, we want to look at today responses and mitigation to risk, which is also referred to as risk control. Responses to risk. Before responding to risk, an organization must determine her risk appetite, which is a function of the people at the helm of affair, that is strategic managers, those in strategic position like the CEO, the board of directors, and the audit committee. These are the people that are responsible for decisions pertaining to risk. Now, these people are the board of directors of the organization. Risk appetite involves how much risk the organization can assume or can bear, as well as their reaction to risk. The amount of risk that the company can assume or is ready to assume is what we refer to as risk appetite, as well as their attitude towards risk. There are some board of directors that may be risk averse, while there may be those that are ready to assume risk. So the different ideology towards risk will determine the risk appetite of most organizations. Responses to risk are determined by the risk capacity and risk attitude. In a nutshell, risk appetite is a function of an organization's risk capacity and risk attitude. What we mean by risk capacity is the quantity or volume or amount of risk that the company is ready to assume. While risk attitude, as I've said before, is contingent on whether the organization is ready to embark on program or projects or businesses that are exposed to risk. What level of risk are they ready to assume, or are they risk averse or risk prone or ready to assume risk? These are talking about risk attitude. Risk capacity is the amount or level of risk that the organization can bear or absorb or take. It can also be described as an organization's risk criteria or risk limit, the amount of risk that an organization is ready to assume. This is what referred to as risk capacity. while risk attitude is the overall approach to risk in terms of whether the board is risk averse or risk seeking. It simply refers to the risk behavior of an organization towards the acceptance or rejection of risk. As I've said, some board of directors would like to avoid anything that will expose them to risk. That's they have a risk averse attitude. While some are ready to assume or take and handle projects that will expose them to risk. That is what is referred to as risk prone. They are more risk prone. Their attitude to risk is risk seeking. They are risk seeking. The board of directors of a company might be risk seeking for one type of risk, but risk averse for another type of risk. The risk decision of the board of directors or management of an organization in any particular situation will depend on the following. Number one, importance of the decision and nature of the decision. So the attitude towards the risk will depend on the following: the importance of the decision and the attitude to the risk or to the decision. I take it again. The importance of the decision and nature of the decision. Number two, amount and nature of the potential gain or losses. The amount and nature of the potential gain or losses, as well as reliability of the information available. Reliability of the information available. All these things are what will determine the attitude towards risk. Now, let's look at mitigation to risk, which is referred to as risk control. There are so many frameworks that have been designed through which organizations can manage their risks. The first method or risk control that we want to look at is what referred to as the TARA framework. The TARA framework is a very useful tool in the hand of strategic managers on how they can manage risk. A TARA framework. The first one is risk avoidance, which is avoiding risk. That's the first A in the TARA framework. Risk avoidance. Most of organizations that may adopt this approach will try to avoid anything or any business that will expose them to risk. If there is any type of project that will make them to face risk, they'll be ready to avoid embarking on such projects. That is what referred to as risk avoidance or avoiding risk. The risk, the risk strategy by which the organization literally avoids a risk by not undertaking the activity or completely withdrawing from such an activity that gives rise to the risk. That's exactly what I said. They will not embark on any project or any business that will expose them to risk. This is what referred to as risk avoidance. This mitigation strategy is most appropriate when both the severity and the frequency of risk are very high. You can adopt this strategy when the severity of risk and the impact of that's the severity or what referred to as the impact of risk as well as the frequency of risk is very high. So you have to avoid or adopt this strategy referred to as risk avoidance. The next one is risk retention or acceptance of risk. Risk retention or acceptance of risk. This risk mitigation strategy is adopted by an organization by retaining or accommodating that particular risk within the organization because they cannot be avoided or eliminated. This does not imply that risk should be taken unnecessarily. Risk retention is usually applied to liability losses which are low and infrequent. In other words, the total exposure to risk is usually very low or reasonable. It can be reasonably contained within acceptable limit. If an organization's exposure to risk is very low, that's the impact of such a risk whenever it occurs, if it is low. And also, if the frequency of occurrence of such a risk is low, there's a tendency that the organization will assume the risk. This is the one referred to as risk acceptance or risk retention. The next strategy we're looking at is risk transfer, transferring risk. This mitigation strategy simply implies the passing of some or all of the risk to another party so that that party will have the exposure to the risk or bear the consequence of the risk. A very good example is transferring risks to insurance companies. When insurance company now start assume the risk of a particular project, for instance, you insure a building project to an insurance company, or insure your life or your motor vehicle, your car to an insurance company. You are transferring the risks associated with such building, which could be fire, incidents, you are transferring to the insurance company. Or in case of a motor car or a bus, if you transfer your bus or your car to an insurance company, you insure your car or your motor vehicle, you are transferring the risk associated with such a bus or with such a motor vehicle or car to an insurance company. That's exactly what referred to as a risk transfer. This is mostly adopted when a risk avoidance becomes practically impossible, or where severity of risk is high and frequency of risk is either low or high. When you have a risk that the severity, that's the impact of the risk, is high and the frequency of occurrence of such a risk is also very high, the appropriate strategy to adopt to mitigate the risk is what referred to as risk transfer. That's what we're saying here. Risk sharing is quite different from risk transfer. Risk sharing has to do with collaborating with another person or company in undertaking risk jointly. Common methods of risk sharing in business are partnerships and joint ventures in a joint venture project or partnership. These are examples of risk sharing. The next strategy of mitigation risk is what refers as risk reduction or reducing risk. Risk reduction or reducing risk. It involves putting in place all measures to reduce the chances of occurrence of risk. Risk reduction Risk reduction strategy is used when risk frequency is high and severity is either low or high. So that strategy of you trying to reduce the impact of the risk so as when it occurs, it won't be so severe. We refer to such a strategy as a risk reduction. We say it involves putting in place all measures to reduce the chances of occurrence of risk, to reduce the occurrence of that risk, or if it occurs, the impact that you have felt on the organization or the individual will be low. We refer to such strategy as a risk reduction. The next one is the next mitigation strategy. So we are done with the risk transfer strategy. The next strategy we are looking at is hedging risks. Hedging risk. This is another strategy to use for mitigation of risk. This risk mitigation strategy is commonly used in the management of financial risks, such as currency risks. Risk hedging is mostly used in financial markets. There are a lot of these risk hedging. Examples include swap and many others. There are so many of them that are being used in international trade. Hedging risk simply means creating an agreement or a transaction that offsets an exposure to another risk. For example, an importing and exporting an exporter in the US who exports goods worth $1 million from United from UK might experience loss if the value of euro falls and the value of dollar remain unchanged. If the value of euro falls, he might end up getting 950. In avoiding this kind of risk, the exporter can enter a hedge agreement that will make him earn $1 million irrespective of the fluctuation in the value of dollar against euro. This is a strategy we refer to as hedging. Another risk mitigation strategy we are looking at is risk diversification or risk spreading. The essence of risk diversification or spreading risk is to ensure that a business participates in other lines of businesses or lines of trade or business activities and build up a portfolio of different business activities, thereby reducing total business risk. What we're saying here is that by risk diversification, we mean you spreading your risk to so many line of businesses. You don't want to engage in one line of business so as to avoid suffering much harm in case that business stagnates. If you engage in one line of business, it will appear as if you are putting your egg in one industry basket, which may stagnate. To avoid that business line stagnating, and the organization will suffer immensely. The organization may decide to diversify, to enter into different line of businesses so as to spread their risks, so that in case one line of business suffers losses, the organization will not be affected negatively because there may be other line of businesses that the organization can rely than putting its egg in one industry basket. That's what referred to as risk diversification or risk spreading. In a nutshell, risks are diversified in order to reduce risk by venturing into different areas of businesses, such as involvement in industry A and industry B, or in country X and country Y. When you are engage yourself in other line of businesses, you are spreading your risk. Or when you start involving yourself in different countries, if country A business has challenges, country B business may not have the same challenge. So you are going to be sustained by the business in country A until when the situation in country A, sorry, you are going to be sustained by country B until when the business in country A improves. Another thing that is also concerned in this risk method is that it offsets poor performance in one area with good performance in another area. When you are diversifying to so many other line of businesses, when one line of business is not doing well, another line of business will be doing well. So you are going to be offsetting the performance in one area of the business with good performance in another area, which is not doing so well. These are what referred to as diversification. Now, let's look at when is risk diversification appropriate? When are we going to adopt this strategy? Risk diversification strategy can be appropriate by a company that might be used. I take it again. When is risk diversification appropriate? A diversification strategy by a company might be appropriate provided that its management have the skills and experience to manage the portfolio of the different business activities it is venturing into. What we're saying here is this: you can adopt this strategy when the chief executive officers or the board of directors or those that are in helm of affairs have experiences in managing these diversified line of businesses. Another requirement is that A diversification strategy by a company is much risky or less appropriate when it takes the, the company into unrelated business activities and meanwhile still struggling to maximize its full potential for growth in its primary activities. When you are now entering into another business whereby your core business area is still having challenges, you want to diversify, you've not been able to maximize your operation in your main line of business, diversification strategy may not be appropriate. Diversification strategy should be appropriate when you have been able to maximize fully the full potential of your activities in your core meetings or your core business. Then you now look for opportunity that might exist elsewhere. Then in that situation, diversification may be appropriate. For example, a company, for example, a company that diversifies into book publishing, running internet cafe, restaurants, and a school could be exposed to very risks because its senior management might not have the skills or experience to manage all the different businesses. That's exactly what we're saying. When you're running a restaurant, at the same time you're running a book publishing, and also you're now going to line of businesses like a school, you may not have such experiences to manage those areas. So the organization may run into trouble. Another challenge is that risks in different business activities will not be reduced significantly if they can all be affected by a common risk. For example, a company that diversifies into house building, manufacturing of windows and bricks will be exposed to risks in all the three businesses if there are conditions to house a market. When you are diversifying into the same line of business, or businesses that have some synergistic relationship, like building industry, you're into block making, construction, and maybe you're also into roof making, and these are all related to building. When there is a slow in the building industry market, it's going to affect the organization in its entirety because diversification are related. You are diversifying into related line of business. These are not conglomerates, but rather they are concentric diversification. There may be challenges for such an organization. The next topic we are looking at is ALAP principle. ALAP is spelled ALARP. ALARP. ALAP principle. The ALAP principle stands for the as low as reasonable practicable principle. As low as reasonably practicable principle. I take it again. As low as reasonably practicable principle. This is what referred to as ALAP principle. Every rational being will tend to have a high acceptability for low risks and lower acceptability for higher risks. But higher risks are usually positively linked to higher returns. That is, higher risks should logically imply higher returns. So, using this framework of as low as reasonably practicable, it implies that if an organization is exposed to higher risk, it should be expecting higher returns. So within this framework, we compare the risks with acceptability. The higher the risk, the lower the acceptability, but the lower the risk, the higher the acceptability. When this is drawn on a graph, it will show, as I've just said, the higher the risk, the lower the acceptability, but the lower the risk, the higher the acceptability. This is what referred to as this ALAP principle. The ALAP principle was developed from the UK health and safety legislation. The ALAP principle suggests that it is not possible to eliminate all risks. If possible, it will be grossly expensive, and residual risks might be as low as reasonably practicable. In summary, a risk is said to be ALAP if the cost involved in keeping risks minimal is grossly disappropriate to the benefits gained from such a risk. We are going to stop here. We continue with the next lecture subsequently. Thank you all, and may God bless you all.